Hi everyone, it's Jen. I'm not going to make it to class this week, so I'm going to record some of my notes for you and let you watch it on this video. So, thank you for watching, and hopefully some of this will be useful information to you that you'll be able to apply, and some of it is things obviously that we can't do because we're not there together in class, and we'll just skip those parts. So I'm just going to run through my slides and tell you what I need to tell you, and hopefully this won't even take too much of your time. So here's our supposed agenda for today. We're going to debrief the blog post that you wrote for this afternoon, construct understanding, talk about that a little more. We won't really have a break. Then I'll explain more in detail about the full period lesson that you're going to be turning in at the end of the semester. And we were going to debrief the practicum. That little cartoon says, I expect you all to be independent, innovative, critical thinkers who will do exactly as I say. So yes, that's exactly what I'm going for. To begin with today, we were going to reflect on your blogs in writing. I was going to give you about 15 minutes in class to talk about the challenges of gathering data and what did you learn about your students, because blog post number 4 specifically asked you to look at data about your students. So I know everyone has done that fairly recently. To talk about a little bit about how raw data, how CST data, CELT data, those kinds of absolute test scores can be useful to you as a teacher, and also how they can't be. But also how the data itself doesn't always tell us the whole picture, and there's still a lot we need to know about our students. So after giving you some time to write about those questions, I was going to give you some time to talk about those questions, and we're just going to skip that part for now at the moment. Of course, all of this is about reflecting on our own learning, and we all know that that's an important thing to do because that's how we grow as educators. The most effective educators I know are the most reflective people, and they all think that they're terrible teachers, and that's why they keep getting better. All right, so Latimer, you read for this week, Chapter 5, Constructing Understanding. We talked a little bit about it last week. I wanted to give you an example of one of my favorite concepts from Chapter 5, which is about creating creative representations of the material in the reading that the students were doing. And I want to give you an example of this from my own class. This is actually something I used to do several years ago. I didn't get to do it this year, but it does still work pretty well, and it can be used in a variety of ways. It's about creating these visual metaphors about civil disobedience. So a visual metaphor is asking kids to visually translate information into some other image. So I'll show you an example in a minute, but I'm going to ask my students to draw me a picture that represents their understanding of something they just learned. So we ask kids to do this all the time when we ask them to draw the water cycle or draw the parts of a cell. But in this case, I'm asking them to draw a concept that's a little less concrete. So in this case, civil disobedience. So here's one of my first students' drawings. This child chose to draw a flower. The example I drew on the board for them was actually a train. And the train had different parts of the train labeled with different authors. The track, I think, was Emerson, and Thoreau was the engine, and different people had different roles to play on the train. So this student tried again, different perspective, went for a flower. She's got Gandhi as the petals, King is the center of the flower, Thoreau is the stem, and Emerson is the roots. So you could apply that to civil disobedience, and she did, because after they draw the pictures, I hand them a piece of paper and say, well, now explain the picture you drew and why each of those people is that part of the picture that you wrote. So this was her explanation for King, was that he was the food for many people as the middle of the flower feeds the small flying animals. So not only did she have this idea that she was going to label these parts sort of thematically based on what they do, but she sort of had a larger purpose to putting these individuals where she did. Here's another one. This student envisioned civil disobedience as a soccer field and had the different players passing the ball from one to another, and put Emerson as the goalie because he passed the ball in. King was the front player because he collects all the advice and everything, and so everybody contributing to the goal was part of the kids' point. These were my, EL writers, so this was actually kind of high level for them to get the concepts and show how it moved from one player to another. This is another example of a creative representation. This is a piece of art a student of mine created several years ago in response to The Great Gatsby. The student happened to be taking a drawing and painting class at the time, and she had access to oil paints. And when she brought me this, she handed it to me very carefully and said, "Be careful, it's still wet." And in fact, it did take several days to dry up in my classroom. So this was her representation of Gatsby. Of course, the woman is Daisy, with the trail of smoke behind her, dripping blood. The green star, of course, representative of the light at the end of her dock. And the black part at the bottom is supposed to be representative of the New York City skyline. So she wanted to show that Daisy was careless, of course, and that she left, death and destruction behind her. And the essay that she wrote to go with this, I wish I still had, because it's actually quite amazing. This is another option for constructing understanding. This is a protocol that can be applied in history. It could probably also be modified to apply to several other subjects. It's the SOAPS protocol. Those of you who teach history are probably already familiar with it. Those of you who teach English are probably familiar with the rhetorical square. We actually did one a few weeks ago. After students have read a text, of course, and understand the main concepts, the SOAPS protocol asks them to go back through it and look specifically to identify these different aspects of it: the subject, the occasion, the audience, the purpose, and the speaker. This is a method for identifying and analyzing primarily, I think, primary source documents, but like I said, it could be applied in other places. So this could apply to a variety of texts. Some of the other post-reading strategies that Latimer discusses in Chapter 5, of course, are strategies for analyzing texts, such as SOAPs, questioning the author. The Socratic Seminar is great on that as well. The applying learning things, asking kids to read it, try it. Here I Stand is an interesting one, that bottom one in the center column. Ask students to read about an issue or understand an issue in more depth, and then literally take a stand at a certain point in the classroom along a continuum about to show how they feel about the issue. And then, of course, the authentic outcomes, of course, would be the most promising. Asking students to provide a real-world solution, make an analytical argument, create a how-to guide, a letter to the editor, or some form of research proposal. One of the interesting things about research is that it doesn't always have to end up being a finished project. A research proposal can show you as much about what students know sometimes as the actual research process itself. All right. I want to switch gears for a moment and talk a little bit about a subject called intersubjectivity. You're all familiar with Vygotsky because you're familiar with his zone of proximal development, and you've been applying that actively in your classrooms. He actually had quite a few concepts related to learning, and one of my favorites is called intersubjectivity, the collective history and mutual meanings shared by a group of people. This is what happens when people get together and talk to each other. They negotiate the meanings of words. They talk about what this really means to us. This is a huge part of where culture comes from, people developing a shared understanding, shared in jokes. When I walk into a meeting at my school and I talk about a PLC, or when I talk about a shared common assessment, people at my school know what I'm talking about because we've developed intersubjectivity about that concept. And that's something that's important for kids to do, to read and discuss something so that they develop that as well. Shared reading experiences create intersubjectivity for students. And so last year, for example, the 9th grade team did a great deal of work that was very similar. So students across our campus were all reading and writing about the same ideas. It created this amazing connectivity between all of the 9th grade class because they were all going through the same thing at the same time. So that doesn't mean you have to be doing the exact same thing as your colleagues, but giving your own students a chance to speak and develop their own intersubjectivity about a concept is really important, because until you all agree on what it means, you can't talk about it any further and learn about it anymore. So it's just an interesting concept to know about, to know that it's at work in your classroom already. I recommend Visions of Vygotsky, that book that's listed there on the page, is a source for learning more about it. And in the spirit of intersubjectivity, we were going to have a fishbowl discussion today, actually get to that fishbowl about the manufacturing confusion article that we read a few weeks ago. So I know you're all probably pretty familiar already with the concept of a fishbowl. We were going to do an inner circle, outer circle fishbowl with some people on the inside having the actual discussion and some people on the outside observing the people on the inside. To do that, I was going to ask you to start by writing 3 open-ended discussion questions about the article, and then we were going to use the fishbowl questions in the fishbowl. And the people in the fishbowl would, of course, be having that conversation. The people outside the fishbowl would choose one participant to focus on, noting their comments, reactions, ideas of their focused participant. And I think Google is trying to tell me that I've spelled participant wrong. Let's fix that. All right, all much better. Good. All right. To support your fishbowl discussion, I was planning to share with you the accountable talk sentence frames. Now, this is something you don't need. You are graduate students and college-educated folks. But a chart like this in your classroom is incredibly helpful to kids, particularly also to English learner students and people who are still developing their ability to discuss and share information with one another. We had a plan for a fishbowl analysis. This is something that you could use to take notes. What are the topics that were discussed? What contributions did my person I was observing make? What suggestions do I have for them? And also just sort of a tally of the structures of their conversations. How many statements did they make? How many questions did they ask? How many connections did they make? This is an example of a rubric that you could have students use to evaluate each other on their participation in the conversation, particularly if you eventually swap the inner circle and the outer circle and have someone on the inside, someone on the outside. So this is the kind of thing that you hope students don't need to have a conversation, but as you're initially training students about how to have Socratic seminars and how to have fishbowl conversations, you might want to fall back on something like this. Of course, we would debrief our fishbowl, what helped, what encouraged your participation, what got in the way, and how effective was the experience in helping you work through the ideas in the text. So as adults, we tend to work through the ideas in the text very easily, independently. Students often report that fishbowls, Socratic seminars, group discussions are actually very helpful. I would talk to you about what it felt like to be in the fishbowl, what it felt like to be out of the fishbowl. Those are important questions also to ask your students, and I'm still spelling participate wrong, aren't I? Fix that. These are important questions to ask your students as they move through the process as well. So whenever you do something like this with students, ask them how it went. A couple of resources about constructing understanding that I want you to have going forward. One is They Say, I Say. That's a great text for giving kids the sentence frames and the academic writing structures that will help them improve their writing. The second one is Strategies That Work, Teaching Comprehension for Understanding and Engagement by Stephanie Harvey. This one, that one is going to have, this one, Strategies That Work, is going to have some really specific strategies for supporting you as you support students to comprehend what they're reading. So both of those I highly recommend. In fact, They Say, I Say, I just loaned to somebody and I had to track them down and get it back because it's an important book for me to still keep using. So at this point, we would be taking our little break. This one's for the history folks. I'm going to pause my recording here at the moment and make sure that it's all going in the way I want it to, and then I'll be back. Okay, and we're back. All the audio seems to be working, and so we're going to keep going. After our break, I hope you had a nice break, we were going to talk about your examples of constructing understanding. I asked you to bring something today that would show that students had been constructing understanding following some kind of reading or activity in your classroom. Of course, you're off the hook now. You don't have to have that for today because you're just watching my video. But this is sort of how that goes. I was planning to ask you to discuss that with a partner to talk about what reading or literacy experience that piece of constructing understanding was building on, which is basically why did students do this? And then what skill is it developing for students, and how are you going to assess it? How are you going to know that this piece of work shows their understanding or not? And how are you going to know if it actually built the skill that you wanted it to or not? So those are three important questions to keep in mind as you're looking at examples of constructing understanding in your own practicum or student teaching classroom. I would like you still to bring an example of constructing understanding to our class next week. It would still be useful to share out your artifacts and to see what's happening in different classrooms. So if you haven't found one of those yet, be on the lookout for it. Try and bring it for next week, our meeting on April 9th. And I want to transition now and talk a little bit more about your last major assignment for the course, your full period lesson. For those of you who are preparing for PACT, this full period lesson could be a part of the unit you are doing for PACT. It could be a part of what you are filming for PACT. It should be focused somehow on reading, writing, speaking, or a combination of literacy demands. Probably not listening. A full period lesson where students really just focus on listening would probably get more into that lecture category, which we're not really going for. We know that students are going to obviously learn more about your subject by reading, writing, or speaking in some way. So let me tell you a little bit more about that. I'd like you to bring a draft of a lesson that you're planning to teach. You're going to get some feedback on it from our class. So basically, instead of presenting it to the small group like you did a few weeks ago for your mini lesson, this time you'll present your plan to the whole class. And you're going to get to pick a date that you would like to make that presentation. Then, of course, you'll teach the lesson, analyze it, reflect on it, collect student work to go with it so you have something to analyze. There is an assignment sheet. You'll follow that format. It is a Word document on Blackboard right now for week 9. And of course, this has to be turned in on TaskStream. And I'd also really appreciate it if you could bring a hard copy to class on or before May 7th, which is our last meeting. It does absolutely have to be entered in TaskStream. I will not grade it if it's not in TaskStream. This is the embedded signature assignment for the course, so it does have to be there. At this point, you would stop me and probably ask me about a dozen questions about all of this, and you'll just have to wait till next week, sorry. Or, if you're burning up with something, send me an email. Now, this part about presenting it to the class, obviously there's about 18 of you. I can't have 18 of you presenting lessons all on the same day, so we need to break that up a little bit, and this is how it's going to go. You're going to pick the date that you want to present your draft of your lesson to the group. Your date choices are April 16th, April 23rd, or April 30th. There is a link there if you go to goo.gl/xwncn. That should take you to a Google form. If it doesn't, somebody please email me and let me know that it's not working. But it should take you to that Google form, and then you'll be able to select your first, second, and third choice of your dates. Think carefully about which date you want to present it to the class. There are some advantages to going early. There are some advantages to going late. Think about what you're going to teach in your lesson, when you want to teach it, how much time you want to have to write it up before it's actually due. Those kinds of things all come into play. You may even want to speak to your master teacher or cooperating teacher before you pick your date. However, I will assign dates by first choice based on the order in which they are submitted. So if you're one of the first 6 people to ask for April 30th, then you'll be one who gets it. If you're the 3rd or 4th person, or if you're one of the 7th or 8th person to ask for April 30th, you'll get a different date. So the sooner you can make your date selection, obviously, the better that is for you. Okay, hang on a sec. Scroll here. All right. Following that, we were going to spend a little time in class debriefing your practicum and student teaching. You can keep this in mind for next week to share a big idea that you've learned in your student teaching practicum, something from your experience about being a successful classroom teacher that maybe you didn't see before. All right, and we're getting really close to the end here. This brings us to our slide for next week. There are 2 readings for next week. They'll be on Blackboard as PDFs. They're already there, in fact. Kelly Gallagher is a guy, by the way. Many people think that Kelly is a female, but Kelly Gallagher is actually a guy. He teaches up in Orange County. He's a full-time teacher, and he's also a really great writing instructor. We're going to be reading a section from him called Using Assessment to Drive Better Student Writing from his book, Teaching Adolescent Writers. We're also going to be reading Carol Jago. Carol Jago is one of my favorite educators. She's a darling lady. She has a number of really great books, one of which English majors I recommend you check out. It's called With Rigor for All. Excellent book. But the one we're going to be looking at today is Peer Assessment and Self-Assessment from Papers, Papers, Papers. That book is about her advice about handling the paper load, particularly for English teachers who tend to carry a very heavy paper load. But as Common Core comes in, as student writing expectations increase in all subject areas, we're all going to need to be better at handling the paper load, and her book has some very good advice about that. Bring with you to class next week a piece of student writing, preferably several copies of it if possible. Try and remove the name as well. And don't forget to select your dates for presenting your draft of your full period lesson. And that concludes the slides that I have to show you for week 9. Obviously, a lot of our work together today was to be done together in class. We will be catching up with that next week during week 10 on April 9th. And then after that, a lot of our time will also be spent talking about your lessons and hearing your presentations of those lessons and discussing how we could make them better. And I think that's a real good practical approach to making you all more effective in the classroom. If you have any questions for me about any of this, please feel free to email me, jenniferroberts@sandiego.edu. I'd be happy to answer them. I will have access to email while I'm gone. If you have anything else, just let me know. Thank you all for watching and listening. Don't forget your blog posts 4 through 6 are due before class at 4 p.m. on April 2nd. Even though we won't have class, those blog posts are still due on that date. All right. Thanks very much. I hope you all have a nice afternoon off, and I'll see you on April 9th. Good luck.